Hello everybody and welcome to Every Movie Ever. I'm Eric and this is the show where we are reviewing every movie ever made, starting this week with Mr. Holmes. This is a recent film starring Ian McKellen of, every nerd role ever fame. He was Gandalf. He was Magneto, and now, kids, he is Sherlock Holmes in a movie that's about a retired Holmes solving one last mystery. Like I said, this movie came out a year or two ago. I am a huge Sherlock Holmes fan. And so as such, I've been meaning to see it for a little while. Certainly a thing that interests me about Holmes is the end of Holmes' career. If you're a big Holmes nerd like I am, you know that at a certain point, he retires from solving mysteries to the countryside, where he raises bees. Well, this movie is sort of about that. It's also about a Holmes who's suffering from brain degeneration. He's becoming older and more senile. He's losing his memory. He's losing his abilities. And so it's a movie that's largely about the pathos of that, about the great detective finding his senses dulled and trying to solve a mystery from his past that is largely him trying to solve the mystery of stuff he's forgotten, largely concerning a case about a missing woman. A case that Watson had written up in one way, but which Holmes comes to discover actually went down a completely different way, and again, kind of forgot about it. It is a somewhat heartbreaking movie, and it's interesting to watch this man, this once confident and assured man, deal with the end of his life and deal with that degeneration. Watson is not a part of the movie. We don't know where he is. Largely, Holmes is flanked by his housekeeper and her son, and they're both very good in this and interesting presences, particularly the relationship Holmes strikes up with the young boy. It's a well-made movie. It's an interesting movie. The pathos in it is really solid. If I have a problem with it, it's twofold. One is that ultimately the movie's only so good. It's pretty good, but it never really achieves any sort of greatness or manages to stand on its own. Secondly, if I'm being completely honest, the film's take on Holmes is not mine. The movie uses a crutch that a lot of Sherlock Holmes media does, which is to say, well, as we all know in the Holmes canon, all of the Holmes mysteries are written by Watson, and as such they're somewhat fictionalized accounts of what happened to he and Holmes. So we have license then to tinker with our portrayal of Holmes. And listen, I think that's completely fine. I do not think, especially 100 years after those stories were written, that anybody should feel particularly beholden to one version of Sherlock Holmes. But like I said, I am a Holmes fan. I think about Sherlock Holmes kind of a lot, and so I have a very specific idea of who Holmes is, and this man is not quite him. This is a Holmes who is more open to others, who is interested in things like romance and companionship in a way that the more misanthropic Holmes that I favor is not. But like I say, that is a nitpick, and I don't think it should be held against the movie. Merely something I'm saying for the other Holmes fans out in the audience. This is a very solid movie, and one that I will ultimately visit again, I think. I'm going to give it 3.5 stars. Let's talk about Superman 4. This is The Quest for Peace. This is a movie that was recently featured on one of my favorite podcasts, the Bad Movie Podcast, How Did This Get Made?, which is why I'm watching it for the first time in years. I think if you have ever seen these things, you probably already know if you're going to watch a Superman movie, it's Superman and Superman 2. 3 and 4 are not any good. Now, I remember seeing 4 a number of times growing up. I don't know if this is true or not, but for whatever reason, I feel like it was on TV all of the time. And I have not seen it outside of short clips in forever. And I had heard it was particularly bad, and yeah, I guess it is. Like, it's not good. This is a movie made by the Cannon Group. If you're watchers of this program, you know I love Cannon films. Well, this is a standard Cannon get the rights to the sequel to a popular film and make it for cheap. There's a lot of reused footage in this, which is really weird. So like every time Superman flies, it's the same, but like the exact same pose, which is kind of weird. It's a goofy movie. It's silly. It's largely about Lex Luthor hanging out with Ducky from Pretty in Pink and making a nuclear Superman to fight Superman, and they fight on the moon and stuff. It's not great. It is very silly. Watching it, I kept asking myself, is this better than Superman 3, which is the Superman movie with Richard Pryor in it, which is not any good? And man, I am not sure. I think it is, though. I think this one is so dumb and campy and so hard to take seriously that in a weird way does kind of come around and make it a little bit more charming. Like I say, it's pretty bad. It's not something I'm rushing to watch again, but it has a sort of charm that a lot of those cheap canon movies do. Even though, and this is a thing I've harped against on the show before, I certainly harp against mercenary films, and this is the definition of a mercenary film. But in part, I think because of the earnestness that Reeves brings to it, and and that Gene Hackman is there and isn't just completely phoning it in. Because there are these weird campy elements in it, and that even if the producers didn't care, there are people who tried involved, that makes its failure all the more noble. I'm going to give it 2.5 stars. Now, if you've been watching this show, you know that I have raved in the past about the films of Taika Waititi, particularly his recent hit, Thor Ragnarok, and the tremendous What We Do in the Shadows, his vampire faux documentary. So it was about time I finally watched one of his first features, Eagle vs. Shark, which is a movie about a young woman in New Zealand who falls for a real doofus jerk character played by Jermaine Clement of Flight of the Conchords. And deals with that. She goes with him to meet his family and really, over the course of the movie realizes how dumb this guy is and how he's using her and how she can do better, all while maintaining a very sort of silly attitude. This is not an overwrought movie. This is not a movie wherein our lead character is cheated on or realizes, that this guy's scum because of dark reasons. This is largely because he's a doofus who doesn't pay attention to her and wants to do things with nunchucks, right? It's a very silly movie. It is in its own way sort of an odd coming-of-age story about how a sort of perennial wallflower learns to come out of her shell and learns who she is and what she deserves in reality versus her own fantasies. It's a real strong movie, really fun and funny. 3.5 stars. Hey guys, let's head over to the Christmas corner. This week in the Christmas corner, which obviously this is where we talk about Christmas movies, we are talking about A Gift to Remember, which is ironically about forgetting. Yes, like Mr. Holmes, which we discussed earlier in the movie, this is largely a movie about forgetting stuff. In this case, yeah, it's that old sitcom favorite, Amnesia, as this is a movie that is about a dude what gets bonked on the head and suffers amnesia, and the woman who, sort of like while you were sleeping, falls in love with him. She works at a bookstore. She sees the guy collapse or whatever. I think maybe he gets hit by a car or something. I don't 100% remember. Takes him to the hospital, and then, because she is apparently a creepy stalker, takes it upon herself to steal his dog and break into his house while looking for clues about who this dude is. When he comes out of his coma and has amnesia, she starts palling around with him, trying to help him figure out who this guy is. Listen, this is weird and creepy. There are a lot better ways to go about this rather than this amateur sleuth bordering on complete stalker situation we are left with. But because this is a Hallmark Christmas movie, that's all largely swept under the rug as, romance. As it stands, as these Christmas movies go, I kind of liked this one because it's so doofy. There is something about just dredging up one of these amiable old sitcom tropes that is in no way realistic and in no way works in the 21st century, and just committing to it that, somewhat works. Of course, there's a lot of other romance movie tropes in this. There are a lot of misunderstandings, like thinking, well, maybe this guy is married and doesn't remember it, or what's this guy's relationship to this person in this photograph. A lot of silly, dumb stuff like that, but it's an easy enough movie to watch, and a decent one if you're sitting around with friends and you want to watch something Christmas themed and kind of make fun of it. I'm going to give A Gift to Remember 2 stars. Hey, it's time for one of my favorite parts of the show. It's time for MST3K A to Z. Yes, this is, of course, the part of the show where we are going back and looking at all of the movies featured on Mystery Science Theater in alphabetical order. This week we're talking about The Beatniks. This is a sort of 50s pot boiler about a guy who hangs out with the wrong crowd, who it turns out he's a singer, and his singing gets noticed and he hits it big, but his friends don't like it. They don't like him hitting it big, thinking he's too big for his britches, he's too good for them. And so, of course, in the fullness of time, one of his thug friends totes murders a dude. So this is a thing that would happen in these 50s movies a lot, where a guy either starts out the movie or ends up in the wrong crowd, and we watch how these beatniks, these no-goodniks, corrupt him and ruin everything for him. And it's, I guess, supposed to be a morality tale or a warning to teenagers about the dangers of the wrong crowd and the joys of conformity. Of course, the beatniks in this movie bear no resemblance to any sort of actual beatniks. Nothing makes any kind of real sense. It's a real dumb movie, but it's so overwrought and overly dramatic that it's sort of watchable and interesting. So I'm going to give it, and this is, again, not a review of it as it appears on Mystery Science Theater, but the movie itself, I'm going to give 2 stars. You guys, it's the worst of the week. This week's worst of the week is Star Wars Episode 3, Revenge of the Sith. Now, I'm sure, what am I doing? What are you doing, Eric? Why are you dredging this thing up? Well, I watched it again recently because, and you know by now, I bring up podcasts on this show all the time. One of my favorite podcasts has got to be the Star Wars Minute, which is a podcast that on its face sounds insane, but which is truly a tremendous podcast about the minutia of nerd culture, and particularly Star Wars. The premise of this show is they watch a Star Wars movie 1 minute at a time. That's right, each half-hour podcast, and this thing comes out 5 times a week, hosted by Pete the Retailer and Alex Robinson. Alex, you possibly know as a luminary in the comic book scene, the indie comics scene. He did the tremendous Box Office Poison. In any event, every episode they devote 30 minutes to talking about exactly 1 minute of a Star Wars movie, allowing them to get really into the minutia of Star Wars. Now, this is not a hyper-serious, really full of itself podcast. It's very free-willing and very silly, and I like it a lot. And they have, believe it or not, on their 6th year of doing this, and now talking about Revenge of the Sith. So I revisited the movie in anticipation of the current season of Star Wars Minute. And Revenge of the Sith this is a movie that is widely regarded as the best prequel. This is the one where Anakin Skywalker completes his transformation into Darth Vader. Rewatching it, I was struck by how truly bad it is. Sort of the big problem with it, and the one that people always bring up, is the turn from Anakin to Vader happens like that. Like you're missing that slow buildup we wanted. It's hard then to understand why exactly did this whiny dude become Darth Vader, and also how? Because his motivations, number one, don't make sense, and then number two, it's hard to buy this dweeb as the great Darth Vader. But the real disappointment for me was how poorly directed it is. Like, I watch it, and there are a couple of bravura sequences in it, particularly the opening star fight, which, by using CG, maintains a steady single camera shot for quite a while. And, the climactic moments on the volcano planet are kind of exciting. But everything in between, which is largely told through super boring reverse shot editing with super fakey CG backgrounds that aren't even particularly interesting, are just oppressive. So does this movie, though, deserve its title as best of the prequels? I don't think so. It is better than Attack of the Clones, which descends into levels of mediocrity and boringness that have never been matched in the Star Wars series. But I do not think it's as good as Phantom Menace. And I know that's a controversial statement, but Phantom Menace is, I just think, a more fun movie and was made by a more engaged George Lucas. It is fundamentally flawed, and I am not saying it is a good movie, but it's a movie that I find more entertaining to watch than the dour and confusing and, yeah, at many times very mediocre Revenge of the Sith. Which is why I am singling it out as this week's worst of the week and giving it 2 stars. All right, you guys, it is time for this week's Best of the Bunch. Well, friends, the worst of the week was Revenge of the Sith, so it's only appropriate that this week's Best of the Bunch is Star Wars: The Last Jedi. Now, you guys have all had plenty of time to see this movie. How do I know that? I've seen it 3 times. Guys, I don't know the last time I saw a movie 3 times in the theater. I'll go see a movie 2 times, but 3? I don't have time for that nonsense. I made the time for The Last Jedi. Now, I am giving you the biggest spoiler alert. I am going to get into it with this movie. If you somehow have not seen The Last Jedi, stop watching every movie ever, run, don't walk to the movie theater, see The Last Jedi, come back here, and then see what I have to say about it. But I do not want to spoil anything for anybody. All right. Are all those guys out of the room? Is it just you and me? Just the Star Wars super fans here? Let's talk about The Last Jedi. Guys, I loved it! If you didn't know that already, I loved The Last Jedi. Boy, I have so many good things to say about it. Now, a thing, though, that really depresses me and makes me sad, my core, is that The Last Jedi has become a sort of controversial film. In the press, this movie has been sort of hijacked as having had a mixed reaction. And I simply don't think that's the case. If you go over to Rotten Tomatoes, last I looked, critically this movie's sporting like a 97%. Critics love this movie. But the audience score is something like 49%, meaning that half of the audience did not like it. Now, there are a lot of great articles on the internet, and I suggest you go out and look at them, analyzing those numbers, and pointing out that the system has been gamed. That there are a very small minority of vocal and active fans who worked as a team to drive those numbers down and make the movie seem like it's worse than it is because they don't like some of the things that happened in Last Jedi, things I'm going to talk about. But all of those things that they hate are things that I love and that I think are vital to the franchise and to not just this movie, but to the health of the franchise. So Star Wars: The Last Jedi, what's it about? What's going on? So this is the latest installment in the Star Wars saga, picking up from The Force Awakens, which I really liked. Rey has gone to an island planet to train with Luke Skywalker. That's how Force Awakens ended, right? She's gotten to this island. She has found Luke Skywalker. She presents him with his lightsaber. The credits roll. We're like, oh man, what's going to happen? And so nerds have spent years now sitting around and theorizing about what's going to happen when Luke gets that lightsaber. And they've been sitting around for years theorizing about what's going to happen with Kylo Ren, the big bad guy in the new series. Who's this Supreme Leader Snoke guy that Kylo Ren reports to? And who are Rey's parents? When we meet her on Jakku, her parents are gone, missing. She's waiting for them to come back. Who are her parents going to be? Is she somehow like Luke's daughter? Is she somehow Kylo Ren's sister, and as such the daughter of Han Solo and Princess Leia? Is she related to like Obi-Wan Kenobi? Who is Rey? Guys, what I love about this movie is really summed up right away. Right when we rejoin Rey and Luke on, I believe the planet is called Acto, and he gives her that lightsaber. Luke takes the lightsaber, looks at it and throws it over his shoulder. He throws it away. That is what this movie is about. Kylo Ren says in the movie, destroy your past, kill it if you have to. And he's right. This is the 8th Star Wars saga movie, the 9th overall. And the Star Wars formula is set. These are movies about destiny. These are movies about good conquering evil, about being a Jedi and family legacy. What The Last Jedi does is it says, that's all nonsense. We can't do that anymore. And I love it for it. Luke has exiled himself to Ahch-To. He doesn't want any part of teaching Rey. He is more Yoda than Obi-Wan. He thinks that the Jedi should die. He looks at the legacy of the Jedi as one of failure, and it's hard to think that he's wrong. The Jedi failed to stop the Emperor from becoming the Emperor. He managed to help defeat Darth Vader and help defeat the Empire himself, but then he lost his own nephew as Kylo Ren turned to the dark side and destroyed the little training facility he'd set up. Listen, guys, I'm kind of getting off topic here really quick because I loved this movie so much and I have so much to say about it. And there's so much about it that's great, and that's a part of it. Luke's turn, his decision that the Jedi aren't all that, and then Rey showing him that they could be, is really cool. Like, Rey shows up, and in talking to Rey, and through a surprise appearance, and again, these spoiler alerts could not be more serious, a surprise and terrific appearance by Yoda, who looks and acts like Yoda for the first time since Return of the Jedi. Luke comes to realize that there is still hope in the galaxy. And that, yeah, the Jedi were messed up, but Rey has the potential to be something more, is tremendous. The other action is also great. There's a tremendous opening bombing run sequence on an Imperial vessel that is super exciting and suspenseful and unlike anything we've seen in the space battles of Star Wars. The sequence on Canto Bight, the casino planet that the internet just straight up hates, is terrific. Now, people don't like it because ultimately this is a place where Finn and a new character named Rose, who's a tremendous, spunky and exciting young female character, where they go to this casino planet to get some information, and ultimately their mission fails. Guys, people are upset that the mission fails, but listen, this is a movie about failure. Everybody fails in this movie. They're dealing with past failures and having new failures. It's important. It's also a movie with a ton of strong female characters outside of just Rey and Rose, who are tremendous. You also have the last performance from Carrie Fisher, who is knocking it out of the park. And you've got Laura Dern as a new character named Vice Admiral Holdo, who, yeah, the movie seeds initially as being a jerk and being disconnected, not knowing how to lead, but who turns out to be one of the great leaders of the rebellion, a woman who isn't taking any guff from a Poe Dameron who is up his own, too into himself, and who ultimately is willing to make an ultimate sacrifice for everybody else. The finale on the Crystal Planet is tremendous. And what Luke ultimately does and what happens to Luke is one of the great sequences in all of Star Wars. This movie has so much to it, guys. And we haven't even talked about the two big complaints yet, so let's talk about them. First off, who is Snoke? The movie said, Last Jedi shows up and says it doesn't matter. Kylo Ren kills Snoke in this movie as almost an afterthought. Who he is and what he has done do not matter. He is not a necessary character, and this movie dispatches with him. Great. There was never going to be an answer to who Snoke was that was going to make sense or be satisfying. Who did you guys think he was going to be? It doesn't matter. Similarly, Rey's parentage. There's been a tremendous amount going on in this movie. The greatest lightsaber battle in the history of the franchise has just happened as Rey and Kylo Ren have teamed up and dispatched a bunch of super bad red armored warriors. And Rey and Kylo Ren have a confrontation. You think Kylo has turned to the side of good, but no, he just wants to use this to grab power and he wants Rey to come with him. Rey can't do it. It is not who she is. And they start talking about who her parents are. And Kylo dangles that in front of her, this knowledge that he knows who they are. And he says to her that she's always known, and reveals that they were drunks, they were nobodies, that they sold her for drinking money, and that they're in a pauper's grave. People hate that about this movie. People say, how can she be a Jedi when she's not a Skywalker? How can she not be descended from some great Jedi lineage? But you guys, don't you see? That's the beauty of Rey and her character. Anyone can be a Jedi. It doesn't matter who you are. It doesn't matter who your parents were or where you came from. She is, as Luke says in the film, nobody from nowhere. And that's important because it means for all the little kids out there playing Star Wars that any of them can pretend to be a Jedi, that anyone has that potential, that it doesn't matter if you're rich or you're poor or where you come from. Everybody is just as important, and everybody has the potential to be the next Jedi and the next hero of a new generation. The movie is called The Last Jedi, but Luke toward the end looks at Kylo and says that everything Kylo knows is wrong, and that Luke Skywalker will not be the last Jedi. And then you cut to this powerful shot of Rey using and realizing her powers to a degree she hasn't, and standing as a leader of the future. Star Wars The Last Jedi is a movie about throwing out the past. Yes, it happened and it was important and it was exciting and it was fun and it will always be there. We can always go back and we can rewatch all the Star Wars movies. And yeah, some of those, particularly the original Star Wars and maybe The Empire Strikes Back, are better movies than The Last Jedi. But The Last Jedi is a line in the sand in saying that things need to change. We can't just keep remaking Star Wars over and over again. We can't hold to this specific set of rules. We need to open up the universe and make it about more. And The Last Jedi does that, and it does it in... And I'm standing here talking to you and making it sound so deep and heady and all of that, but the truth is this movie does it in such a fun and exciting way that it's nowhere near, I think, the pomposity that I might be getting close to right now. So I don't want to talk about the movie much more, but to throw out a couple of things I loved about it. I love the milk creatures that Luke gets his blue milk from. I love the creatures. I love Rose, and I love Rose's sister who shows up in the movie. Haldo is amazing. The sequence where she makes her sacrifice is one of the most stunning movie moments I have seen probably in my entire life. The Porgs are fun. Chewie is great in this. BB-8 is always fun. And it was so much fun to see BB drop down inside of the X-Wing and do what his job is and try and repair stuff inside the X-Wing. We've never seen stuff like that before. Watching Poe grow as a character and realize that his cocksure attitude is maybe undeserved and is not what the rebellion needs out of a leader is tremendous. Yoda is so great. You guys, this movie is a gift to Star Wars fans. If you saw this and you felt bad because it wasn't the movie you expected, or you felt like it wasn't Star Wars because it took things in a new direction, please see it again and be open. And I promise you're going to love this movie because it is a heck of a movie. 5 stars all the way. So that's going to do it, guys, for this episode of Every Movie Ever. Thank you so much for watching. We'll be back next week while we try and review even more movies and try to review every movie ever made. Good night.